Sales conversations where both buyers and sellers win are rare and plagued by the cringe. We've all felt it. It's that sinking feeling that both buyer and seller get when the conversation is going off the rails. My name is Adam Clay. I'm the CEO of Rainmakers. I've spent 25 years building and leading global sales organizations and thinking about the sales conversation. At the Cringe, we put the sales conversation under the microscope and explore pathways to ensuring that sales reps, leaders, and managers conduct great sales conversations. Today, my guests are Siobhan Thatcher, Strategic Go-to-Market Execution Advisor and recipient of the Sales Enablement Lifetime Achievement Award from Selling Power, and Stephen Timme, founder and president of Finlistic Solutions and best-selling author of Insight-Led Selling. Stephen's also a return guest. Stephen and Siobhan jointly co-authored an ebook, 7 Steps to Building a Customer-First Revenue Organization. Find a link to it in the comments. Stephen and Siobhan, welcome to the Cringe.
Good to see you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
It's so good to be here with you. So before we dive in to the heart of the matter, Siobhan, tell us a little bit about the work that you've done in and around global revenue enablement.
Wow, there is a lot of it, but I would say most of my work is around the strategic positioning, the partnerships, and how enablement really is an investment that companies make in order for the folks that they have that go and play on that field. So all of their salespeople or anybody customer facing, that they are trained the best, they are armed with the best materials, and the conversations they're having with their customers are the most effective in helping the customers understand how to buy from them or even whether to buy from them. So very much customer focused. That's where I spend a lot of my time.
All right, wonderful. And Siobhan, you've been doing that for some remarkable organizations. Can you give those that haven't met you before a sense of the types of organizations you've worked with over the course of your career?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah. Okay. I worked for a BI firm for a long time. I worked for a financial firm for a while. In the last 5-6 years, I worked at Ring Central, which is a big telecom firm, global firm. Worked at Slack, and most recently worked at Salesforce.
All right. A distinguished set of companies. Thank you for that. All right. And Stephen, for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with you from a prior episode, would you tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do at Finlistics and talk about the book, Insight-Led Selling?
Yeah, so real quick, in a previous life, I was a professor of finance at Emory University here in Atlanta where I live, but I switched and started focusing on helping mainly enterprise sellers, but other groups do a couple things. One is, how do you talk to executives and not talk about features and functions? How do you talk to different groups within an organization? Because we all know that the buying groups are getting larger and larger, and you just can't go talk to the CIO or the CFO anymore. You have to talk to a lot of folks. And then early on in the cycle, because these buyers are much further down the buying cycle, is give them some insights into what the financial, business, and financial benefits are of their solution. So it's really those 3 key things that we do at Finlistics, and we're very fortunate to have some of the top technology companies and consulting companies out there utilizing it.
All right. So we have a lot to talk about today. I'm very keen to dive into the ideas that you guys conveyed in your recent co-authored ebook. And I think this is going to be an exciting combination of guests on the Cringe. We haven't done this before, where we actually have big ideas and implementation of these ideas represented in a singular episode through the two of you. I'd be doing everybody a disservice, though, if the first stop on the train here wasn't the first question that we always ask every guest. And Siobhan, I'll put you on the spot first. So when you're privy to a sales conversation, either in one, listening to one, observing one after the fact, what makes you cringe?
It's really straightforward. And that is, there is not enough of this, and there's too much of this from the salesperson. They need to shut up and listen. That is really what the challenges are, because you can't understand your customers or really understand what their issues are if all you're doing is talking about your product and you immediately jump to solution and you don't dig in to the thing behind the thing, right? They may give you a very high level problem, but that's not really the problem. What's causing that problem? What's the root cause? And unless you're listening and unless you really are curious and put the customer's issues first, you're never going to get that.
And so we're gonna talk a lot more about this in a few moments. But Siobhan, just to further your point, why do you think that is at a high level?
I think there's a combination of things. Number one, people's compensation plans are designed for sell. It's a lot more about quantity than it is about quality. In most cases, not always, but in most of the cases I've seen. The other thing is that there isn't enough time or enough opportunity or tools available to sellers to really be able to dig in to the information about a company. Right now, with the advent of AI and the focus that it's on right now, there's a lot more capability to find that information. But you have to learn about a company. Either they don't have the skills to do it. Like if you said to somebody, go look at their SEC filings and their 10Ks and their NQs and come back and tell me about the business, you just get a blank face. If these people are going to spend money, you have to understand how they spend money and why.
I think that's a pretty good setup. Having spoken to you before, let me ask you, when you're privy to a sales conversation in one of the ways that I just described a moment ago, what makes you cringe?
Not knowing their goals. I mean, and builds on Siobhan's, like, what are they really trying to get done? And I'll give you a good example, but one of our customers that we were coaching is they were talking to a merchandiser at a retail store, and they're going on and on and on and on and on about their forecasting techniques and to do 10,000 forecasts in 1 minute. I'm thinking, we only need one. And then it just wasn't moving forward. I said, well, why do they want a new forecasting tool? And he goes, I don't know. So we were on another call, and I asked a merchandiser, why do you want a new forecasting tool? He goes, oh, I want to have a greater sell-through rate, so we have fewer markdowns, we have less inventory on. So Siobhan builds on Siobhan. What are they really trying to get accomplished? And they're really not trying to buy technology. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I can't wait to buy some more technology. It's more like, I can't wait to solve some more problems or accomplish more goals.
All right. So thank you both. So let's dive into the conversation. You two recently co-authored an ebook about taking a more customer-centric approach to the sales process and the sales conversation. Your answers to my opening question about what makes you cringe speak very directly to that. Siobhan, if I understood you correctly, let's listen to the customer and not talk so much. Let's understand something about what might make the customer tick before we get into the meeting. And Stephen, you reinforced that point. Understand what your customer might actually be trying to accomplish from a business perspective, what's meaningful to them. So let's start by talking about why these ideas, which are timeless in one sense, have not been implemented in enough of the industry. Why does it remain such a challenge? Siobhan, would you weigh in on that?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is a lack of insight into this particular customer's vertical, for example. Maybe you're trying to sell into some market that you don't really know anything about. And so you go in there with the same story as you would for market A, as you would for market B, market C. They all have different vernacular. Some of the challenges are going to be the same. That's true. But they describe them differently and they get affected by them differently. And so there has to be an understanding of that. And I don't believe people do enough research along that line. I don't think they bring insight into the conversation. So it's not just, what did you learn? But what does this customer, maybe they don't already know, and you've got some insight you can bring. So you have to be able to ask the open-ended questions that are going to get that conversation going.
Very clear. So Stephen, just building on that, and you and I talked a little bit about this the last time we spoke. What is, to Siobhan's point, authentic, genuine, useful insight sound like? Where does it come from if I'm a salesperson?
For publicly traded companies, it's what Siobhan said, like what's in their annual report or what's their investor presentations. I tell folks all the time, if you got limited time, which is unfortunate, go read the letter to shareholders. And they'll mention goals. They'll mention the financial metrics they're most focused on. So one is just really having a structure, like what does good look like, right? And then how do, one of the things I find is the sales leaders, they want their people to be successful. They want their customers to be successful, except now look at the ratio of sellers to sales leaders. They don't have time to coach, right? Or some, unfortunately, have been promoted that shouldn't have. And then Siobhan, something that you and I have spent a lot of time about, and that was the purpose of the ebook was, well, wait a minute, where does sales enablement get involved in this, right? And it's not just sales enablement, it's just not sales leaders, but really what we talked about in the ebook is what's the North Star? What are you really trying to get accomplished within the revenue organization, and how are you going to measure success? Well, unless you answer those two questions, how, you can have a check the box, go take a financial acumen course, but it's not translated into what the outcome is going to be or should be.
Got it. And so I think that's a great leaping off point into another topic that I was eager to address, but I just want to make sure we're grounding those who are newer to some of these ideas and are listening around what insight is, like what you might bring to a prospect in a conversation. Because Siobhan, you mentioned it, Stephen, you've written a lot on this topic. What does that actually sound like if I'm a salesperson? So I've read the annual report, I've done my diligence. What might that actually sound like?
A couple of things is that, one, show me that you understand my business. And one of the things I've learned from talking to a lot of executives is tell me something I don't know. That executive's very focused on their business, where a lot of our friends out there are working with multiple companies within an industry. And, don't give away anything confidential, but you've got to see things, say, hey, here's how I've seen a shortcut. Here's how I've seen risk. Here's how we can accelerate implementing or achieving your goal and implementing strategy. So tell them something they don't know. Otherwise, why would they even take the meeting?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think as a kind of superpower that salespeople have, because they're talking to companies in that industry all the time, that's quite underutilized, I think underleveraged. Siobhan, would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with it. I think some of it comes from the coaching that they get or the lack of coaching that they get. What I see a lot is that very successful, high-performing salespeople are moved into management positions. But here's where we have problems with that, is that if you think of the 4 levels of competence, right? There's the unconscious incompetent, the conscious incompetent, the conscious competent, and then the unconscious competent. Most of these high performers are unconscious competence. They don't know why they are so good. And they don't have the ability to tell people who work for them or to help them or to coach them through it. So what do? They simply jump in at the end of every quarter, become super reps, try to close all the deals slip, high discounts have to be given, all of that. Whereas sales managers who are in the conscious competent stage, those are the ones that you want, because they can talk about what it is that got them to be successful and how to help others and coach them. The coaching is not, what have you done for me lately? It's not only the typical coaching, pipeline forecasting, account territory, it's also skills. And you've got to be able to do that. And I think the lack of coaching is really, I see it in most places where I look. The coaching just isn't sufficient.
If I can build on Siobhan's, the other thing that we see a lot is, even if everyone has the knowledge, I don't have the confidence to go talk to a marketing exec, a financial exec. I mean, even there are these brilliant people, they just don't have oh my gosh, it's the chief marketing officer and they're really smart, and who am I to be talking to them? I mean, that kind of crazy stuff. So it's really, Siobhan, to your point, how these super reps, one of the things I see, they got confidence and they tell people something they don't know. But without the confidence, even with all the knowledge in the world, I don't want to go talk to the executives. I'm going to do bad in front of the executives. So, I mean, that's just a big, abyss that we need to help our friends cross.
There's a lot of fear, and that's where enablement comes in. I mean, as enablement, we can help them practice, right? The more repetition you have doing these kinds of things, the more comfortable you're going to be, the more it's going to become rote. And when you get that deer in the headlights, you can be, I describe it as being a duck, right? On the surface, a duck looks very calm, everything else. And underneath, they're just paddling like crazy. And that's kind of what we want the sellers to be, is on the surface, very calm. But underneath, they may be paddling like crazy. And the more they practice, the easier that becomes. And that's where enablement can come in and where we could really help.
I want to return to that topic, but we had this parallel path in the conversation that we were also building toward. Because Siobhan, I'm very interested to get your perspective on the mission of enablement, how organizations in general are doing against your definition of what enablement would be doing from our conversations. I know you have a lot of original thought in that regard. So this notion of operating with intention, of being consciously competent, being aware of what you ought to be doing. I love that. You guys have wrapped what makes a good sales process and sales conversation into a couple of concepts, 7 in your ebook. And the very first one is this concept of a North Star. Stephen, would you mind telling us a little bit about what that means and how it relates to this conversation we're having now?
Yeah, it's the revenue organization. The organization. I didn't say enablement. I didn't say sales. I didn't say marketing. What are we trying to get accomplished? Is it we're trying to increase closure rate because we're in the 4th quartile? Is it we want to be much better at building pipeline? But what is it we're trying to get accomplished, and then measure our programs, the involvement by everyone against that? Did we achieve our goals? It's just the craziest thing in the world to me to see people spend, literally billions of dollars. We had one company that spends like $400 million a year in enablement. And we're saying, hey, we want to interact with our friends to see what are we accomplishing, not just utilization, not just the number of reports they run. Oh, no, they're busy. Well, I'll take your money, but I just think we all know what the return is and all that stuff. So what are you really trying to get accomplished? And everyone agreeing, yeah, this is the North Star that we're driving.
I think it's being able to ask the right questions and getting the right questions answered. A lot of that I see, there's a lot of things going on in enablement, for example, where we're just fixing broken things. They may not be the right broken things, though. And the fix might not have anything to do with what it is that we're doing right now. And so I call it the 5 questions. And I ask this of any of my enablement team, any of the sellers, anybody that wants sellers to do something. I always ask these 5 questions. And they are, how do you align with the go-to-market, current go-to-market? Do you know it? And how do you align with it? What kind of priority does this have with everything else that we've got going on? So if it's got a high priority, what's pushing or what's being stopped? How are we going to measure this? And from a measurement perspective, its outcomes and its impact as pertains to the sales organization and the sales process. Not, we have vanity metrics and enablement, how many people went through the course, what's the score, all that. Nobody cares about that but us. So that's not what I'm talking about there. The 4th thing is, what is the timing on this? When is it due? If we're, depending on where we are in the calendar, the yearly sales calendar, there are things that may come up where we go, it's not going to have any impact this year, and we're in the crunch. We're moving that out, right? Thank you. High priority, yes. Not going to start until the next fiscal. And then the last thing is, what exactly do you want the salespeople to do? Sit down and learn something isn't an answer. What do you want them to do? Get more calls, do multi-product sell, have conversations around this, help with a campaign. What exactly do you want them doing physically? That's going to take time out of their day. Learning is not an answer.
So that's clear. And let me just take a shot, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. So Stephen and Siobhan, you're saying that even if an organization nailed all of those 5 things and they were very clear about the elements as you just described them, Siobhan, in any given enablement program, it's quite possible that that they wouldn't link to some North Star, that thing that Stephen just described is what we need the revenue organization to actually do, whether it's cross-sell or increase lifetime value or improve customer retention or get more leads or improve velocity, that more often than not, please stop me if you think I'm off base here, that enablement activities can exist almost in a vacuum, like untethered from what the business actually needs.
I think if you have the 5 questions, that will tether it to what the business actually needs. But you have to ask them, and you have to have the confidence to ask them, and you have to be asking the right people.
Love it. So your 5 questions are a way of tethering, not to overuse the word.
I'll stand by them in any situation. I think those 5 questions, they're not going to get you deep, but they'll get you enough to know whether or not the next step you take will be of value to the organization, right? We need to be value-based and investment in the organization where what we provide is value to the folks that we support.
All right. So Stephen and Siobhan, everything that we've spoken about so far sort of argues for a customer-centric approach to selling. And we've spoken about how you can actually deploy that approach into organizations. But let me just pause and ask this question, because it was on my mind coming into this discussion, and it might be on the mind of those who are listening. Sometimes people hear customer-centric approach, and it sounds oppositional to what many sales leaders or even salespeople, by virtue of buying into what their sales leaders believe, that the company that I represent has an agenda. I have certain things I need to accomplish in a meeting. I've got my list of questions. I've got my goals for the meeting. And sometimes those things can sound oppositional to one another. Well, what do you need me to do? Do you need me to drive my company for whom I'm selling, their agenda, or do you need me to drive the customer's agenda? And I wouldn't be surprised if people are conflicted or need some help parsing those two things. Now, I think I know what the answer is. I don't want to spoil it, but how do you resolve those two tensions? The sales organization's need for control in a conversation, balanced with what the customer actually needs to accomplish, regardless of what you as a selling organization thinks they need. So who wants to take that one first?
The concept of control, that to me is old school. It was the days of we eat our young and we win and we don't care what the customer says and don't confuse the sales with the install.
Yeah, there you go.
Heard that,
all right. Yep.
That doesn't work anymore. Our customers are a lot smarter. They have a lot more access to other information. I think the fear is that there are so many steps in the process that have been outlined in the sales process that customers want to follow or sales companies want to follow their own sales process regardless of what the customer wants to do. I mean, there's a big debate. When do you do a demo? If a customer says, I want to do a demo on the first call, do you actually do a demo on the first call? I think it depends, right? I used to be, no, but now I think it depends. Yeah, it depends. I think the issue is more around, do you understand what the customer really needs? So for me, customer-centric means you understand where they want to go. And we started with this. What are their goals? What are the challenges that they see? And really, when it comes down to it, we want to figure out whether or not we can help them. Because what I don't want to do is shove something down a customer's throat, get them to believe it works, and then spend the next 80% of my time for the next year and a half dealing with all the problems of a customer not getting what they really needed, right? So there's this short-term view, and it needs to be a much longer, because really everything about the customer relationship starts after the deal closes. And if you want to continue that relationship, I mean, churn kills a lot of customers, a lot of companies, right? Where you grow and where you really grow is through adoption. And through adoption is because they got the thing and you understood the business and you got them exactly what they needed at that time. And they may need more later, right? But you at least have the opportunity to have a conversation. That is customer-centric to me. It's not a matter of controlling everything that happens. It's making sure that they get what they need and we get what we need, and we do it in a way that is above board, as transparent as can be possible, and so that it's a win-win.
I happen to agree with that, by the way. And so, Siobhan, you are still saying, like, hey, as a salesperson, we're here to understand first as opposed to seek to be understood, which is to say, we got to ask a bunch of questions. We have to listen with a lot of authenticity, wait to speak, following your comments at the top of the episode. And do it with an eye toward really understanding what the customer is trying to accomplish. You didn't say this, but let me just throw it out there. Perhaps not as heavily focused on whether or not this is a good opportunity for me, because the control style of selling supposes that the salesperson asks questions, just like you mentioned. But the purpose of asking those questions is largely for determining whether or not this is a good opportunity for my company. Do you see the difference, or am I trying to cut it too fine? Okay.
Yeah, no, I do see it, and I think everybody on this call understands the concept of happy years. And so, if you're only in control, you can be in control all the way to proposal, and then find out at that point that they're not going to do anything.
Yeah, they never call you back.
You've been in control the whole time. Good for you.
But they're never going to call you back.
But nothing's going to happen.
Okay.
And that
now, why
is I follow
that?
all the steps, but I don't have all the information that I need. Because I didn't stop. I did everything my company told me. I went through the CRM. I check. Right? Yes, they have budget. What you didn't find out is, are they willing to spend the budget on this current issue and potentially with you?
Sure.
Yeah, I got budget.
Sure.
Right? I mean, there's all of these things. And I think if you don't listen, and if you don't put the customer first, and if their pains don't become your pains,
right,
then your solutions aren't going to be solutions for them.
Well, so how about this? Let me just run this by you, because I loved everything you just said. So you get all the way to the proposal, customer doesn't call you back, and you're sitting there wondering why I followed my process as outlined to me by my organization perfectly. It's entirely possible that in doing so, you didn't give a delightful experience that the prospect really didn't enjoy talking to you or working with your company. They're sitting there wondering why you're withholding a demo for 2 or 3 meetings, or, you refuse to answer certain questions until you get access. So, I don't actually know for every organization which is the right way to go, but you said something earlier, which I do believe, that buyers have more choices than ever. The experience that you provide to a prospective customer is more important than ever. Sales reps aren't sitting on piles of proprietary information like they used to. You can go online, learn anything you want about any company these days. So I think your customer-centric approach, correct me if I'm wrong, says, hey, you've got to ask your questions, understand what's on the mind of the customer, to Stephen's point, arrive with a lot of that already in your back pocket. But it has to be encased or wrapped in an experience that's going to get the buyer what they need, and it ought to be delightful.
They're not buying features. They're buying a relationship, and they're buying understanding. That's what they're buying, not the features.
I remember this a number of years ago, one of our client sales kickoff, and the guy gets up, the VP of sales is a big Marine dagger, and slams into the table, and either you're in control or out of control. Well, okay. No, it's like any relationship, personal relationship, as an example. I don't think it's like, okay, I'm going to meet this person, and what can I get out of them? It's how are we going to have this relationship? And the business ones are no different. I mean, the executive buyers want the sales rep to be successful. The sales rep should want the company to be successful. And it's like building any relationship. So this bit about, if customer first or giving up control, I mean, I think it's a wacky way of thinking about this. You're building you're building a relationship that you hopefully is going to be long-term. The customer wants them to be long-term. They don't want to talk to 5, 10 different vendors. And you, Adam, talked about the experience Siobhan you did, because a lot of the executives I work with, at the end of the day, they view a lot of technology as almost a commodity. right? And we can say all the nice marketing stuff we want about ours is this and that or whatever. Executives know you're not going to you're going to use maybe, if you're lucky, 50% of it, maybe. And so it's really who provides that best, customer experience, not just who had the best sales experience, but truly a customer experience, both in before and after. So I 100% agree with this bit about, if you're not in control, you're out of control. It's just, just nuts.
And what's interesting is now there are companies that are NPS and sentiment companies like G2 that people are turning to. And that command and control, that doesn't play anymore. It just doesn't.
That's interesting. So glad I asked that question. My guess is we're going to get a lot of feedback from those listening.
My guess is we will
this
too.
Part of the conversation.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we can't do a command and control and close a deal, but the likelihood of you getting another deal are very low. Very low,
right. The likelihood of you getting a referral from that customer, right, or a favorable review. Right. You're probably bordering on more of a transaction as opposed to, the start of a long-term relationship. So I have to ask you because it's a question I've had to ask myself when I was, leading sales organizations at various times in my career. How would you go about designing a sales process that is customer-centric, that also mirrors the way in which your prospective customers want to buy? So, Siobhan, you used the classic example. I think there's a lot of tension still around this one little thing that happens in sales cycles. It's like, do you demo in the first meeting or do you provide it? Do you just do discovery in the first meeting? What does the organization want? What does your buyer want? That's an example. And so you can make a conscious decision, based upon what the buyer wants, to demo early or demo later. That's but one example, but it's a decision that's designed, right? Because of the way that the buyer wants to actually learn about your product and make a purchasing decision. So how do you start to design a sales process that's actually customer-centric, that reflects the way that people want to buy and isn't colored by issues of seller control or questions of seller control?
I think the first thing you have to do is map the customer's journey. How does this customer buy, right? What do they do when they're purchasing? How do they spend your money? Like, I've never, ever said to somebody, how much is your budget? Instead, my question has always been, I know that you've got a pot of money that you need to spend. How do you decide what to spend it on? What are the decision processes? What makes sense? What doesn't? How has it changed over the years? Who's involved? Right? Map out the customer's process, not only the buying process, but the implementation process afterward. Right? Figure out what that is. Then align your sales process to that and understand that the customer journey looks like this, and then can come backwards and then flip around a lot and then go here and then go there and, be adaptable enough in your sales process to understand some people it's very difficult for them to buy for whatever reason. They're nervous. They don't want to make a big mistake. It's right. So how do you ensure that you're answering all their questions, that you're asking all the right questions to get them to think? Because a lot of people that are buying, some of them are buying for the first time. They don't even know how to buy or what they should be looking at. So that is where our expertise and the number of years we have in selling to people and understanding what a buying process could look like, that we can help them. But we won't know that until we understand, that if they do know their process, and if they don't, where are the gaps? How can we fill the gaps? Then align with that. Like a mutual plan. I don't know how many mutual plans I've seen that have been written by the sales organization and then dumped on the customer side. Hey, here's our mutual plan. We're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and then we're going to do this, and at this time we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And then you get the response of, are you aware that our team is out this week? And no, we can't do any of that. It's got to be shifted. It's not mutual. There was no mutuality in it at all, right? It was just, here's what we're going to do because this has always worked for us. And it's got to get done early. It's like bringing professional services in. Bring and introduce professional services early Start negotiation discussions early. What is high value for them, low value for you? Start doing that kind of stuff. Get it done early. So by the time it comes, the rubber meets the road, everybody is familiar with it and everybody's comfortable with it. And it's so much easier.
Yeah. In fact, Siobhan and I spent a good amount of time on this. I think it's chapter 3 in the ebook. It's called Creating the Strategic Execution Playbook. And Siobhan hit a lot of the highlights. And then we get into, what's the common industry goals? How do people get compensated, right? What industry insights? I mean, there's the whole list of things there. But, the point being is putting those all together and continuing the nourishment around those, as opposed to, attend this workshop or this webinar, check the box. And I love what Siobhan said earlier. Now, what am I supposed to do with all of this stuff? So, there's, again, you can download the ebook, and we go into quite detail about not just structuring the enablement plan, but also getting into, well, how does this change account plans? Because that's the part, Adam, I see a lot is people say, okay, now go find the customer's goals, do this, do that. And then I'll say, can I see your account plan? And it's just the same old stuff, right? Here's what's coming up for renewal. Can we get a price increase this year? And you're looking at go, what? Why did not make it into the account plan, right? It's not that hard, really.
No. One of my favorite questions to ask these customers, especially the leaders and the customers, is to say, it's a year from now, you're on stage winning an award. What's it for? And hear what they say, because that will give you more insight in what they're trying to do than a lot of different things. Number one, it puts them on stage and that image gets implanted in their brain that you help them get on stage. Yay. But it's also, what are they really trying to accomplish? Right? Is it on stage internally within their customer, within their own company, or is it on stage at some big professional certification event?
Right. Great question. I think I'm going to add that to my repertoire. I've never asked that, but that could be quite revealing. So what you're going to get in response to it is what really matters on a personal level to that individual that you're talking to.
On a personal level, that's what matters.
Yeah, hard to get to, by the way. So, Siobhan, we've talked a lot about ideas that could enhance the buyer-seller interaction, buying process, the sales process, how that breaks down conversationally. So as a lifetime practitioner of sales enablement and having gotten to know you outside of this episode, I know that you have a very clear definition of what revenue enablement is. And I'd love it if you could share that with the audience and talk a little bit too about where you think the gaps are in the profession, particularly at this moment, because my sense in talking to companies every day about sales training and sales enablement is that it's slowly and steadily being deprioritized at what seems to be a moment that calls for the contrary, given the way that sales productivity is going, which is down. So would you mind riffing on that for a couple of minutes?
Sure, I'd be happy to. There are a couple of things. There's, what I call the 4 pillars, and I'll be very brief. But for me, the 4 pillars of enablement are, did they get the memo? Does everybody understand what the go-to-market is? And has that go-to-market been shared throughout the organization? So everyone understands why a company even exists and why customers buy from them. That's a simple thing to start with. Second thing is all the content, all the assets, the website, scripts, everything. Is that all aligned with the current go-to-market? Notice I say current. It's all aligned with the go-to-market, so everybody's saying the same thing, and there's we're on the same ship. The third part is, from a seller's perspective, or for anybody who's customer-facing, can they get what they need to support the conversation, either by going to look for it or by having it pushed at the right time? So it's automatic, right? This is where a lot of this automation can come in, and good CRM systems and whatnot. And the last piece of it is the tribal knowledge. What is working, what is not working? And get that information as soon as possible. We love to talk about where we win. What we don't like to talk about is where we lost. But most of the knowledge, most of the learning comes by going through those loss reports. Why'd we lose? Right? And I would venture to say, and it was controversial, we lost because we got outsold. Right? I mean, that's part of it. And so you tie that together with the business within a business concept. I do not talk about enablement as a training organization. I don't talk about them as we're a support organization. I talk about it as a business. I've got investors, which is anybody who wants to give me money, and in return, we give them back results, with performance, attrition, whatever, those numbers. I've got a supply chain, which is anyone who wants to put something in front of the sellers has to come through me, because I can make sure that it aligns with the 4 pillars, and that what we're actually doing is controlling the chaos and the noise that these poor sellers have to deal with now. And then I've got my customers, and my customers are the sales managers and up. It's not the salespeople. They're the end users of all this good stuff. But it's those managers are the ones that I focus on. And it's the partnership between enablement and those sales managers, which is going to make the programs work. And it's going to be able to highlight, because the conversation about what we do, the 5 questions I talked about earlier, those 5 questions get answered with a conversation between enablement and sales leadership. They answer the questions.
So just briefly, because I know we're short on time, but I have to ask, I get the sense that some enablement organizations, maybe they're newer enablement organizations at slightly smaller companies, they have not been successful in positioning themselves as a center for growth, as a center for revenue, that they've allowed themselves to be boxed in as a cost center exclusively. And therefore, when times get tough, it goes. And that's what I was alluding to in my question that I asked you, because it seems, particularly for smaller organizations, maybe less so in bigger ones, it's a center in organizations that seems to be difficult to defend at this precise economic moment that we're in. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, unless that relationship, what I call R2N4, which is responsible to, not for, unless that relationship between enablement and sales leadership isn't tight, and there is accountability on both sides and responsibility on both sides, then yes, enablement is a cost center. And as a cost center, we are spending all of our time trying to justify our existence. And all too often it's like, they're overlay. We're not getting anything out of them. And so they get cut, right? Doesn't mean they're not doing good work. Instead, when we talk about enablement as an investment in the organization, then we can talk about things like driving revenue growth, right? We've got seller empowerment. We've got outcome-focused metrics, right? And the stuff we talk about is not how many courses and score. We're talking about how has performance gone up? How has attrition gone down, right? Attrition not just of customers, but attrition of our salespeople. That's a very, very costly enterprise right now. I think the number I saw most recently was $1.2 million is how much it costs when you've got a salesperson that's been with you a year and then leaves. Because someone else is going to sell that. These customers aren't going to wait around for someone else to get ramped up. They're going to go somewhere else. So there's the cost of the customers. There's the cost of it's really expensive. And it's got to be seen as a strategic function.
What a terrific note to take us home on. Thank you for that, Siobhan. So I want to give you both an opportunity to send the audience out with a hot take. That's anything that's on your mind that you think is important that you would like to share. Stephen, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and this builds on Siobhan's, but it's called Show Me the Money, right? And if you're, think about it, marketing, think about the literally billions of dollars that is put into marketing. I can tell you as a finance type, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to give you $1 million to go spend on this campaign. I'm expecting at least $5 million back, and then I'll apply the profit margin and everything else. What is different about revenue enablement? I have never understood that. How what I'm getting out of is the finance as the CFO. I'm like, okay, we'll do it because there's certain things people take a job because we will do this for training, and I understand product training, all that stuff. It's just crazy to me. And Siobhan, you and I have had this conversation, so it's not shocking over the last 2 years how many revenue organizations have just been greatly reduced, and sellers' quotas have not been changed. So show me the money.
And mine is don't trade innovation for increment. If you want to do some things differently, then you have to be willing to look at everything and innovate. Changing one little thing here, one little thing there, and not changing the underlying issues, you're just going to make it bigger and worse and harder. And you'll lose all your people. You'll have horrendous turnover because they're not being successful. You must innovate. You must.
All right. I love that. What a great note to end on. So show me the money and don't trade innovation for increment. Well, Stephen and Siobhan, thank you so much. It's been delightful to talk with you today. I'm looking forward to sharing this conversation with those that listen to The Cringe. Thank you so much for joining us. This was wonderful.
Thanks. It's been delightful. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, everybody.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow me, Adam Clay, on LinkedIn. I'm regularly sharing cringe-killing thoughts around the sales conversation there. This podcast is produced and presented by Rainmakers, where we believe the sales conversation is everything. Check us out online at www.rnmkrs.com.